Good morning, Hartsville and surrounding counties, nations, wherever you guys are tuning in from. We're just excited that you're here with us. My name is Matt Winburn. I am the Museum Assistant Manager here at the Hartsville Museum. And welcome. We're very glad you guys can have taken this time to learn a little bit more about what we do at the museum and about maybe something you've never heard of, which is the Green Book. So we're joined today by two very special people, and I'll let them introduce, well, let Andrea introduce herself.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, everybody, thank you for joining us. I am Andrea Steen, the Museum Manager at the Hartsville Museum, and we're excited, even during this COVID-19 outbreak, to celebrate the museum's 40th anniversary. And we're doing that by offering a new lecture series, and this is the first in what we hope to be more to come for the remainder of the year. And I'd like to introduce Cherish Thomas. She is the Registrar at the Florence County Museum, and she is joining us today to talk about the Green Book. Thank you, Cherish.
Well, thank you both for having me. I'm excited to be here. Hello, Hartsville.
Cherish, we've known each other for several years now, so it's great to reconnect with you. And I want us to learn more about you and about your job with the Florence County Museum, kind of what you do as a registrar, and if that position kind of sparked your interest in the Green Book, and why don't you tell us a little about that?
Of course. So yes, as Matt said, I'm the registrar at the Florence County Museum, and it is my job to take care of our collection. So all of the objects and the artifacts that you see in the museum, any museum, it's someone's job to take care of them. And for my job, that entails documentation, photographing, exhibit preparation, whatever needs to be done to an object, it's my job to make sure that it's taken care of. And my interest in the Green Book, like many people, perhaps, actually started when I saw the 2018 movie Green Book, starring Mahershala Ali and Viggo Mortensen. Now, if you haven't seen it, I won't spoil it for you. It's an entertaining movie, but I wouldn't say that it does the actual Green Book justice. It's not entirely historically accurate. It is an entertaining movie, though. But that is what sparked my interest. And after watching it, I became curious to see if Florence had any Green Book sites. And so I went to the library and I found a copy of the Green Book, and lo and behold, Florence had quite a few Green Book sites, but no one really knew anything about them. And so that sort of inspired me to start researching and digging deeper into the history and the legacy of these sites.
Well, and Cherish, we're excited to learn more about this. So let's not waste any time. I think we're ready to jump right in. We're going to give you the floor. Andrea and I are going to skirt out of the screen, so we do this all to you. Those who are viewing, we hope you'll take notes and have some questions. We'll have a question and answer period for Cherish, or if you have a question maybe for Andrea and I about something with the Hartsville Museum, we're happy to answer those as well, but especially with Cherish and the Green Book. So have those questions ready, and we'll announce whenever we're ready for those questions. So Cherish, we're going to skirt out of the way and give you the floor.
Great. Alright, so I'd like to begin by discussing precisely what the Negro Motorist Green Book was and why it is important. First and foremost, the Negro Motorist Green Book was a travel guide that was written by African Americans for African Americans during the Jim Crow years of segregation in America. And much like travel guides today, it included various business listings that were open and welcoming to serving African Americans as customers. And that ranged from restaurants, hotels, bars, beauty parlors, and other various businesses. It was published between 1936 and 1966 by a New York City mailman named Victor Hugo Green and his wife, Alma Green. And one interesting fact about the Green Book that I don't think a lot of people know is that it was a crowdsourced book. And what I mean by that the listings that were included in the Green Book came from reader submissions. So readers of the Green Book from all over the country would write in to Mr. and Mrs. Green with recommendations of various businesses that they knew of were welcoming to African Americans and ask that these businesses be included in the book. And that was how Mr. and Mrs. Green acquired and compiled most of the listings for their book, was through a reader submission. And I cannot stress enough just how vital the Negro Motorist Green Book was during its day. Because if you were an African American in, say, 1956, and you wanted to go on a road trip, before you ever even left your house, you needed to map out precisely where you were going to be stopping for gas, where you were going to eat, and where you're going to sleep. Because if you were an African American living during segregation, you do not have the right, the privilege, or the luxury of being able to stop at the first gas station, restaurant, or hotel that you came to along the way. Because solely based on the color of your skin, those businesses may not have served you. And it also may not have been safe for you to stop there. So in this sense, the Negro Motorist Green Book was much more than just a travel guide. It was also a very valuable tool. Because by utilizing the resources that were in the Green Book, many African Americans were able to, in a sense, take back some of the power that segregation had tried so desperately to take away from them. And now, thanks to the Green Book, they had the knowledge of what lay ahead of them on their trip, and they could prepare accordingly. So, for example, prior to the publication of the Green Book, if you found yourself in an unfamiliar city and you were hungry, you just had to hope and pray that you would find a restaurant that would be willing to serve you. But now that you had the Green Book, you could look up that city in the book and hopefully find any number of restaurants that you could be certain would be open to welcoming you as a customer. And this is what the Negro Motorist Green Book looked like. These are 2 pages that are taken directly from the 1954 edition of the Negro Traveler's Green Book. And actually, before I move on, I should probably clarify something. Depending on who you're talking to or what edition of the Green Book you're reading, you may come across the Green Book as being referred to in several different ways. And that's because it actually changed titles throughout its publication. So it was first referred to as the Negro Motorist Green Book to promote car travel and road trips. Secondly, it was referred to as the Negro Traveler's Green Book, once air travel became more popular. And lastly, in hopes of gaining a broader and more diverse reader audience, it simply became known as the Traveler's Green Book. But if you're like me and you want to save yourself some trouble and confusion, you can simply refer to it as the Green Book, and generally people will know what you're talking about. But yes, as I said, this is 2 pages from the Green Book. This is what it looked like. And as you can see, the states listed in the Green Book were listed alphabetically. So South Carolina is generally always towards the end of the book. And the various cities that were featured in the Green Book were also listed alphabetically, followed by the categories of various businesses and their listings. And as for South Carolina in the Green Book, we were very well represented during its publication. Throughout its publication, South Carolina had a total of 21 cities that were featured in the Green Book and 171 businesses. And as you can guess, some of the larger cities in South Carolina tended to have more Green Book sites. You see we've got Columbia at 49, Spartanburg at 24. But the smaller cities in South Carolina, they were also well represented in the Green Book. Cheraw, as you can see, that's a fairly small town, but it had 12 Green Book sites. Florence had 8, and Darlington had 2. not featured in the Green Book. However, later on in the presentation, I will be briefly discussing Darlington's 2 Green Book sites. And considering Hartsville is a part of Darlington County, hopefully our viewers will stick around to hear about those. But for right now, I'd like to tell you the story of Florence's most well-known Green Book site. And that is a tourist home by the name of the Ebony Guest House, which is located at 712 North Wilson Street in Florence. That's in northeast Florence, located about 2 miles from Wilson High School, if anyone is familiar with that landmark. And it was owned and operated by this woman. This is Mrs. Mary Holmes. And the Ebony Guest House really began as the brainchild of Mrs. Holmes. She had a vision to open a tourist home for traveling ministers. But later on, that vision sort of evolved and expanded into including not just traveling ministers, but also any African American travelers who were in need of a safe and hospitable place to stay while in Florence. And Mrs. Holmes shared this vision with her husband, Reverend Norman Holmes, who was a pastor by vocation and a carpenter by trade. And he, along with several members of the local community, actually built the Ebony Guest House for Mrs. Holmes by hand. Here we have a picture of Mr. Bernard Barrett, who is one of the construction workers who helped build the Ebony Guest House. He is standing beside what was then an unfinished guest house. And here we have a photo of the completed guest house. This is Mrs. Mary Holmes, the owner and operator, standing with her niece Carolyn outside the house in July of 1960. And this photo is actually a little bit misleading because the angle at which it was taken actually makes the guest house appear to be quite small. But this is not the case at all. It's actually a rather large house. It's 3 buildings with 20 rooms. And as you can imagine, running a guest house of that size took quite a lot of work. I have the pleasure of personally knowing the granddaughter of Mrs. Mary Holmes, Mrs. Geraldine Barkley, and in my conversations with her, she would tell me that as a child, she and her siblings grew up with her grandmother, Mrs. Holmes, and that they would often help her with the endless loads of laundry that needed to be done for the guests, along with cooking meals and other various chores of that sort. And in that sense, the guest house was very much a family and community-run business. As a matter of fact, one of Mrs. Mary Holmes' neighbors, a woman by the name of Catherine Harris, she actually was the one who came up with the name for the guest house, the Ebony Guest House. And it was also her idea to include the guest house in the Green Book. She was the one that placed an ad for it. And that was in 1953. A year later, in 1954, the Ebony Guest House began advertising itself in the Green Book as Florence's famous guest house. And nowadays, we might not think anything of that because the word famous kind of gets thrown around a lot in advertising. But back then, it was quite justified for the guest house to be advertising itself as famous. Because according to Mrs. Barkley, who's again the grandchild of Mrs. Mary Holmes, many notable celebrities of the day were once guests at the Ebony Guest House, including Sam Cooke, Mahalia Jackson, Shirley and Caesar, the Marvelettes, Ruth Brown, along with all of the other celebrities you see here and more. All of whom, according to Mrs. Barkley, were once guests at the guest house. And most of them were just passing through Florence, but we know at least one of them did perform in Florence while they were there. And that was Mr. Jackie Wilson. This is an ad from the Florence Morning News dated May 19, 1963, advertising look like. It is currently Iola Jones Park, and it is located right around the corner from the Ebony Guest House. So aside from being a place of comfort and hospitality for Black travelers and who are also celebrities, it was also located quite conveniently to a venue where at least one of those performers, Mr. Wilson, once performed in Florence. And this is a photo of the Ebony Guest House today. It is still standing, and in a sense, it is also still operational. This photo gives you a little better sense of the size of the guest house. As you can see, you've got the front here. There is another building, which is 2 stories, which is located directly behind this front building. And then the gray 2-story building to the left here that is also a part of the house. And it is currently owned by the grandchildren of Mrs. Mary Holmes, who have done an excellent job in attempting to preserve the house. It is no longer a guest house, but the grandchildren renovated much of the rooms when Mrs. Holmes passed away, and they are now open as apartments to the public. So we owe a lot to Mrs. Holmes' grandchildren for working so hard to preserve their grandmother's legacy for us.
So Cherish, we're going to slide back in here with you really quick, and hopefully you guys can see us. If not, let us know. We're getting a thumbs up from Lauren. Wow, for those who have just tuned in or late tuning in to this presentation, we're here with Cherish Thomas, who's given us a fantastic presentation on the Green Book and how it relates to Hartsville and the surrounding counties. So viewers, now would be the time. If you have questions for Cherish, go ahead and send those over. We'll start compiling those. And in the meantime, Andrea and I have a couple of questions that we want to ask Cherish.
Yes, thank you, Cherish. That was an amazing recount of the book. But I'm curious, was the Green Book the first and only travel guide of its kind, or were there others?
So it was not the first and it was not the only, but it was definitely the most well-known travel guide. The first Black travel guide was a book by the name of Hackley and Harrison's Hotel and Apartment Guide for Negro Travelers. But it was only published for 2 years, in 1930 and 1931. So it preceded the Green Book. But in many ways, the 2 books were similar. The only major difference is that Hackley and Harrison's guide, it only included listings for hotels and apartments. So, whereas the Green Book included a wider variety of businesses, again, such as restaurants, bars, beauty parlors, gas stations, and other various businesses. There were several other travel guides as well. There was Smith's Travel Guide, the Go Guide to Pleasant Motoring. The U.S. Travel Bureau also published a Black travel guide in conjunction with the National Park Service. And there was a travel guide that was simply called Travel Guide as well.
So aside from being a travel guide, like you mentioned, in what other ways was the Green Book relevant to the African American to history?
So aside from being a travel guide, today the Green Book really stands as a lasting testament of the accomplishments and the contributions that many African Americans made to their communities throughout the years, specifically African American women, because many of the businesses that were featured in the Green Book were owned and operated by women. If I remember correctly, I believe there's at least 5 Green Book sites in Florence that were either solely owned and operated by women or were co-owned and operated by women. And in that sense, these businesses, they were much more than just businesses. They were also safe havens for African Americans where they could simply just exist, without fear and be treated with the proper dignity and respect that they were not granted in white-owned businesses.
And speaking about the contribution of African American women the success of these businesses and whatnot. You mentioned earlier in your presentation that the Green Book was started by Victor Green and his wife. I believe once Mr. Green retired, his wife actually took over as the publisher and as the head of the business, and she had an all-female staff under her. So here we have an African-American woman in what the 50s running her own business. She was a trailblazer in herself.
That's absolutely right, Matt.
So keep that in mind.
Well, Cherish, like the Ebony Guest House in Florence, are there any other buildings or sites that are still standing and operational today?
Yes, and there's one in particular that the folks in Hartsville may be familiar with. It's a little restaurant in Cheraw called the College Inn, and it's located on 2nd Street on property that once housed the first black school in Chesterfield County called Coulter Academy. There are other Green Book sites that are also still standing, and some are operational in Columbia. And if anyone would like some more specific information on those sites, I would recommend getting in touch with the people over at Historic Columbia. They have done an excellent job in working to document and preserve the history and the legacy of Columbia's Green Book sites. You can also visit their website at historiccolumbia.org.
Thank you.
So you mentioned there are other Green Book sites in Florence and Darlington. Can you tell us more about those?
Of course. So for the sake of time, today I was only able to share the story of one of Florence's Green Book sites. Again, that was the Ebony Guest House. That's Florence's most well-known site. But Florence also had 7 other Green Book sites, most of which were either tourist homes or restaurants. However, Darlington also made its contribution to the Green Book with 2 sites. The first was a gas station, which was owned by N.L. Ponton. It was located at 715 South Main Street in Darlington. But it was only listed in the Green Book for 1 year, in 1939. And sadly, that's about all we know of that particular site. The second one, which may be a little more well-known, was a place by the name of Mabel's Motel, or as some of the locals may remember it, Mabel's Chicken Shack. And it was located on US Highway 52 in Darlington, right where Blackman Memorials now stands. And it was owned by a woman named Mabel Robinson, and I'm told that it began as a hot dog stand that was opened during tobacco season in Darlington in the 1940s. And eventually, as the business grew, Mrs. Robinson began offering a wider variety of food, hence Mabel's Chicken Shack. And she also added a motel behind the restaurant later on as well. But again, we have a similar story with that particular site in the sense that not much is known about it. And this is where we need your help. If any of our viewers watching today happen to recognize any of the names or the businesses that are featured on the screen here, if you have any stories or any memories that you would be willing to share, I would absolutely love the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with you. I know it has become a mission of the Florence County Museum to try and preserve and to document and record the history of these sites while there are still people around who remember them, and I'm sure Hartsville, that can be, the same can be said for Hartsville as well.
Absolutely. Viewers, if you know of any Hartsville sites that might have, provided refuge or who might have, been featured or been a part of the Green Book, please let us know. Or just, we love telling the story of Hartsville, and this is just another way that we can do this. So thank you, Cherish, for bringing that up.
Of course.
So Cherish, and I know that our time has been brief today, and there's so much more that we can talk about. If people wanted to know more about the Green Book, what are some good resources, and can people reach out to you for those?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. I believe there are some handouts of sort are going to be uploaded later, along with this video to the Hartsville Museum's YouTube channel. Please take a look at those. We've got a more detailed list of the Florence and Darlington Green Book sites, which provide more information for anyone who's interested, along with some additional resources as well. And again, if anyone has any stories, any memories that they'd be willing to share with me, please don't hesitate to reach out. I can be reached at the Florence County Museum's phone number, which is 843-676-1200. And again, my contact information will also be included on these handouts or links that will be included later on.
Absolutely. Cherish, I just mentioned, viewers will have we'll have the supplemental material that Cherish mentioned, her contact information, as well as today's lecture, all available for you to view at your convenience at a later time. We'll have it on our Facebook page, on our YouTube channel, and on our website, hartsvillemuseum.org. So just click on over and give those a review. Speaking of our website, Andrew, do you want to tell people about if they're interested in donating to the museum, what they can do?
As part of our 40th anniversary, we're always looking for new ways to reach the public. And starting with Cherish today, she is our trendsetter for something good to come in the next months. And if you'd like to donate and help support this project, you can visit our museum website, and we have a Donate Now button that's available, and we would greatly appreciate anything that you could contribute to help us keep talking about things that are happening here in Hartsville and Darlington County.
Absolutely. Well, today has been such a joy. I've learned so much, and I'm excited to do more research of my own. Viewers, you may have noticed two books sitting up here earlier. One is the Negro Green Book. This is actually it's a combination of 4 different books that you can look through and get a better idea of what the Green Book was all about. We also have Driving While Black. This actually begins just right up the road in Chesterfield County. It's such a poignant story. Both of these will be available at the Hartsville Museum through the month of September, so please come in and look at them. They're on loan from the Hartsville Memorial Library, who was kind enough to donate those or put them on loan for the month of September. So if you don't make it into the museum in September, just head down the street to the Hartsville Library and you can check them out on your own time. So Cherish, again, thank you so much for being here. Viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. Today has been fantastic. And as Andrea mentioned, this will be an ongoing series. And part of that is to fulfill the mission of telling the story of Hartsville and surrounding areas. I think we all recognize that while this might not be our story to tell, it's still a story that needs to be told, and that's why we're doing this lecture series. So you can look for things that range from more historical topics to things that really help Hartsville grow. For instance, next month, we're going to be talking with Presley Coker about Hartsville Pedigree and Hartsville Farms and the impact that the company had in Hartsville's flourishing as a city, and really the impact it had on agriculture in the South. So tune in for that. That's going to be October 1st at 11 a.m. Same channel, and as always, if you can't make it then, we'll have it available on our various platforms.
Thank you, Cherish.
Well, Matt and Andrew, before we go, do you want to see if there's any questions from the audience?
You know, actually, you did such a fantastic job at explaining this. We don't have any questions from the audience, but we have provided links and resources for later questions. Like I said, feel free to reach out to Cherish. Feel free to reach out to us, and we'll have all those answers to you have questions that people might have. Like I said, Cherish, you're just a wealth of knowledge. You did such a great job. And we look forward to having you again, even if not as a lecturer, as just a visitor. Come and visit us sometime.
I plan to do that. Thank you both. And thank you all for joining in.